So, all right, I'm going to start recording here. Record to the cloud. And we have two copies of it. Beautiful. And let's see. So you're going to put this up on your page as well. I saw a thing. I think that you were advertising that you're going to go live with this, or
Well, we talked about doing a TikTok live
yeah, let's do
afterwards.
that. Oh, afterwards. Oh, okay.
We could do
All
before or
right.
after. It doesn't matter to me, but
Okay. Because we can also push this out live.
oh, we
There's a
can.
there's a way to do that. I don't usually do it, but you can go live on YouTube. I can go live on YouTube. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. I'd love that.
All right. We can go live on YouTube, and then we can also later
Edit and
edit it, like with all the fumbling and whatever. All right. So let me see if I know how to do this. So YouTube, and then what is like your official title? Like what is your like what should I put in the title? Pastor Jim or what do
yeah,
you
Pastor Jim is fine. I'm on TikTok. It's digital Pastor Jim, but that's just sort of a kitschy catchphrase just
yeah,
for.
that's what I'm looking for where people know who you are.
Oh, okay. Yeah, digital Pastor Jim coming to you live
Live
in an underground
digital.
bunker. Trying to make my microphone not stand out here.
Okay, go live. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, go live. All right, I hope it's going live. I can never figure out. I've only done this a few times. I usually don't have the bandwidth right to do it. So, setting up your meeting for YouTube. We might already be live, Jim. I can never tell with these things. All right, as far as I know, we're live. But anyway,
All
we're
right.
recording. All right, shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices. I'm here with Digital Pastor Jim. Shalom, Jim. How are you doing?
Shalom, my homie. How are you?
Pretty good. Jim, where are you located?
I'm in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Okay. I'm on the east coast of the US right now. Although behind me you see a virtual background, which is from the Bologna University Library. I took that photo there. Um, I've been following some of the stuff you do on TikTok, and what I was really fascinated about what I'm seeing is you get clobbered from two different sides. It's like,
I
and
get
and
it
I
from
and
all
I
sides.
and I'm re and I think I'm kind of surprised at some of the interactions you're getting. And look, that's the nature of TikTok. Like you people make a video and then somebody else stitches it. And so there's this kind of like confrontational dialogue. But I wouldn't have expected, I guess coming from my perspective, that the people who are kind of coming at you. So, and you tell me, well, why don't you tell us what are some of these interaction or whatever the word is, these interactions, yeah, that you're
I,
having with different perspectives on online.
yeah. I look at it as a healthy debate. Sometimes people get hostile, and I don't appreciate hostility, but my goal is to respond in a kind, loving, in my opinion, a godly way,
Hmm.
and not react with hostility towards those who attack me with hostility. So I was a little bit of my personal story. I was raised Lutheran originally, and I became a believer at 13 years old and got into Assembly of God, Pentecostal for a little while, Charismatic, Vineyard, Calvary Chapel. If you don't like any of those groups or denominations, not important. And then I was a Calvary Chapel pastor here in Colorado Springs, an associate
Hmm.
pastor for several years, and so we teach chapter by chapter, verse by verse. Calvary Chapels, that's their moniker,
Hmm.
and we try to really ground people in a good
What I
biblical
what I
ethic.
know about Calvary Chapel, or what I think I know because I've heard this from people, is that they're pro-Israel. Is that right? Is that they
Extremely pro-Israel,
okay? Like
yes.
like I met a woman once who was Jewish, and she was a Messianic Jew. And she told me the way she ended up making Aliyah, moving to Israel, was she was like just a regular Sunday Christian in Calvary Chapel. And everyone's like, "What are you doing here? Like, we want all the Jews to move to Israel." She's like, "Why would I move to Israel?" And that's how she ended up making Aliyah eventually. So that's the only
Wow.
thing I know about Calvary Chapel.
Oh
So
yeah. Calvary Chapel was part of what's called usually euphemistically the Jesus People movement in the 70s and 80s,
really,
uh, led by Pastor Chuck Smith in Southern
I'm not sure I
California.
know fully what that is. Maybe we'll come back to it, but All
Sure,
right, so
sure,
you
yeah.
were a pastor at Calvary Chapel.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a technically it's not a denomination, it's an association, but we teach the Bible verse by verse, chapter by chapter.
Mhm.
Very, very pro-Israel. And then one day I heard the Shema prayer for the first time. And
Hmm.
I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea in Hebrew. And I wept.
Let's assume some of the audience doesn't know what it is. Why don't you tell them?
Yeah, Shema prayer is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 and 5. And I still get emotional 7 years ago
Mhm.
just thinking about it. Um, it's Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might or all your strength. And of course, Jesus, Yeshua, quoted that when the Pharisees and Sadducees came and told him to sum up the law and the prophets. And then he added Leviticus 19:18 and love your neighbor as yourself. And so I heard the Shema prayer and I wept. I wept uncontrollably. Um,
Hmm.
and so I had to find out what it meant. And so I started studying. And
Hmm.
usually, one of the first people you come across is Michael Rood on the Rood Awakening, and you know Michael, and that's where I saw you teach as well for the first time. And Michael is larger than life. I'm sure he's like that in real person
In
as
real
well.
life, he's like that too. Like sitting in his living room, there's no difference. Like like that's what you see is what you get. Like in his living room, like it's the same as him being on stage. He is
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I kind of figured that. And so then I saw your interactions with him, and then I studied as many things as I could find. And
Mhm.
over the course of the past several years, my life's changed a lot. I still believe the basic tenets of Christianity, but I also like to embrace the Torah. And I watched you and on your broadcast quite a bit. You were super informative. And the other gentleman that you do the study with, his name always slips my mind, the
Keith
Methodist
Johnson,
minister. Keith, yeah, Keith, buddy. How do I forget
former
Keith?
Methodist
Yeah, former Methodist, yes.
at this
And
point, for sure. Yeah.
and I learned so much, from
Mhm.
listening to you guys interact, and that taught me how to approach Orthodox Jewish people
Mhm.
and talk to them in a loving, kind way without being offensive with my own spiritual background. And so I
Let's
made
stop there
friends.
for a minute. I taught you how not to be offensive to Orthodox Jews. That's a great compliment to me. I think a lot of times I offend Orthodox Jews. At this stage of my life, probably unintentionally. When I was
Yeah,
younger, perhaps intentionally. So I take that as a compliment.
yeah. Well, I that's what I appreciated so much about your interaction with Keith, is because you guys talked about your tradition. And if you approach Orthodox people to discussing your traditions, it's way less offensive to them than if you talk about different theological points, as what I gathered. So, and so I made friends with the Chabad rabbis here in town,
Oh wow.
built some rapport there. And so about 8 months ago, I was asked to take over a church here in Colorado Springs. So I'm the senior
Hmm.
pastor at Springs of Living Water Church. And we're growing. We try to embrace the biblical expression of the feasts of God. I don't like to say the feasts of the Jews because it's really God's feast He gave to the Israelites. And then I love studying the different traditions: the Ashkenazic, the Sephardic, the Mizrahi, and any tradition I can find, because it adds fullness to the picture. And then, of course, the Karaite traditions. I learned a perspective of the Karaites from listening to your teachings, and I've got a series of books: Karaite Jews in Egypt by let's see,
Morato
El
Kotze.
Codici, and so
Morato Kotze.
so yeah, I probably said it wrong. And so yeah, so I love
Mhm.
it. I can't get enough of it. And I
Okay.
had a Chabad rabbi say, "Jim, you have the neshama of a Jew."
Okay. And that means for those who don't know the spirit of the spirit in the sense of like the soul of a Jew.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
wow, interesting. So all right, so I've seen you on TikTok and I see you get clobbered from the one side, and maybe it's not clobbered. Confrontational is it's not necessarily confrontational. The fact, well, we'll get into it. So you're being challenged, to put it that way. And maybe like you said, it's a healthy conversation. I just didn't expect such a big pushback from, and maybe this is me being in my little bubble. You get a really big pushback, it seems, from like Christians who say, Jim, you're putting people under the law. That's
Yeah,
done away with. What? There's no more Passover. It's Easter. Why are you doing that? And then I see you get pushback from the other side, and I'm laughing because like those two guys could have a conversation with each other. And I don't mean specific people, right? But those
right.
two perspectives could have a conversation with each other, which would be different than the conversations they're having with you. So if the pushback I see from the other side is, you got to follow, Yeshua was a Jewish rabbi. You have to follow what the Jewish rabbis teach. You can't just follow the Bible without the traditions of the rabbis. So
Hmm.
so I would love to see the conversation between the two sides that are pushing on you, because what an interesting conversation that would be. They would probably agree to a large extent. Well, no, I don't think the other side would
Oh
agree with
no.
the
Yeah, they're
Christians. So,
diametrically opposed.
but you're kind of like, we have an expression in Yiddish, nicht dahin, nicht daher. You're neither here nor there, right? You don't fit into either camp in a sense,
Right.
and you're getting pushback from both sides. So that's what I find so interesting. So, and I've seen other people go through that, like Michael Rood. But like here, you're coming from like, and you're even like now the pastor of a Sunday church. Am I right about? Is that a Sunday church?
No, we meet on the Sabbath.
Oh, you meet on Shabbat. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. And
And
what's the name of
and
the
we
church again?
it's Springs of Living Water on our
Okay.
website, if it's okay,
Yeah.
www.springsoflivingwater.co. And
Mhm.
we do our service. It's very different from a traditional church. So we usually do it podcast style. There'll be me and Caleb was here a few minutes ago. Caleb and I will teach from the Torah portion that week and the
Oh,
Haftarah,
wow.
and then also the Brit Hadashah. I study, because with Christians, of course, we're coming from very little background in the Torah, so I don't have to go very deep to blow their mind, and try to reintroduce them to what is this book all about. I One of my
So,
favorite
yeah.
memes
Oh, go
on
ahead.
Facebook is a picture of a guy wearing seat and a robe and a big beard, and he said, "Christians always forget Jesus, Yeshua, was a seat wearing, Torah teaching rabbi in Israel."
It's really
And
interesting. I once read I think it was like a book or something or an article, and it talked about how in Western civilization and not just Western civilization, and even in China, there's this actually in China as well. Yeah, there's been this theme in the last couple hundred years of imposing whatever your view of the world is on Jesus. So
hmm
Mao, who is I guess the founder of modern communist China,
hmm
he portrayed um, Jesus as a communist revolutionary, right? So
hmm
in Acts chapter 2, when they were all sharing things in common, that's the forerunners of the communist revolution, right? Like, I
hmm
mean, you hear that, and you're like, what is this guy crazy? But like, but it's an example of how people like impose whatever they kind of have on Jesus, on Yeshua. And like Mao doesn't need to do that. He doesn't come from a Judeo-Christian culture, but this is
No.
just a thing people do. So I don't remember how we got into that, but oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You said that people forget that Yeshua was, wore tzitzit, and right. So
And taught
so
from the
that,
Torah. Yeah.
oh, and what that made me think of is the Pope who recently had Jesus wrapped in a keffiyeh as a baby,
Mm,
right? Well, what's that about? That's a very deliberate political statement that Jesus came from Bethlehem, therefore he was a Palestinian.
mm.
Um, Even though if he was alive on October 7th in Kibbutz Be'eri, he would have been kidnapped and strangled to death with bare hands, the way that Kfir Bibas was. So
Yeah.
hopefully
Oh,
that
that
didn't
that
just
breaks
get,
my
get
heart.
us banned from YouTube, but that's what
Yeah,
happened, guys.
it is.
So okay, so I think I want to understand better. I've had some interaction with the. Well, let me ask this. So is your church is it a church? Let's start with that.
Yeah, it's a church.
Okay, because I'll hear people who will say, "Oh no, we're Messianic Jews." Oh, your mother and father were Jewish. Oh no, I'm not Jewish. Then what do you mean you're a Messianic Jew? Well, and then and I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying it's extremely confusing to them and even more so to me. Um,
Right.
so you're not saying you're a Messianic Jew. You're a Christian who has a church, but you meet on Shabbat and you tell. What's your view on the Torah? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so I think the Torah is the foundation of all scripture. We interpret everything in
Mhm.
scripture from a Christian perspective from the Torah first.
Hmm.
So I look at the prophets from the Torah. I look at the New Testament from the Torah. The Apostle Paul, I think if you study him well, you realize he wasn't teaching against the Torah. Now, some denominations say that he was, but he wasn't. Jesus, Yeshua said, I've not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to pleroo them, to fulfill them.
I've read that
And
somewhere.
yeah, I bet you have. Yeah.
That's
And I
yeah,
look
they're
forward to hearing
Matthew
about the.
5:17, and you should keep reading, guys, through like verse 19. Don't stop in 17.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, so I'm trying in my mind, I'm trying to
Mhm.
hold those two opposing ideas, what some churches, Christian churches think are opposing ideas, back together.
Mhm.
The God of the Old Testament, of the Torah, he is a God of mercy and compassion, and he loves people, and he wants them to come to himself. And then he gives us a path to get there. And that's through, the Levitical priesthood and the offerings. And as a Christian pastor, I couldn't have told you 7 years ago what the seven feasts of God were. I couldn't have told you. I didn't know. I went to Bible college. We just went to talk about it. But now I see there's an integrated, is it Chuck Missler, as a famous Bible teacher from many years ago? He'd say 66 books by over 40 different authors. And we now realize it's an integrated message system from outside our time domain. It helps us understand how to get back what was
Mhm.
lost in the garden 6,000 years ago. God wants to walk with all of us in the cool of the day. And
Mhm.
and we don't throw out the Torah, we embrace the Torah. And even things that are hard for me to understand from a Christian Western worldview, I'm trying to deconstruct my Christian Western worldview and step into a Hebraic worldview. And you live in both worlds, probably more so than the average person, because you live in the United States and you spend a lot of time in Israel, etc. But that's hard for us to embrace in the far Western world. And so that's what I try to do is reintroduce a very Hebraic worldview. It's about honor versus dishonor instead of right versus wrong. It's about understanding that God wants to restore what was lost. And I
Let's
feel like I'm
dwell
doing
on
God's
that.
call.
It's about honor versus dishonor. That's really interesting. Talk about that. That's
Oh yeah, yeah, because there's stories in the Torah that if you look at it straightly from a strict Western right versus wrong perspective, it's confusing.
hmm
But once you realize it's about honor versus dishonor, like Judah and was it Tamar? Is that her name?
hmm
Uh,
Mar, yeah.
yeah, that's a confusing story from a
You know,
Western
when I was in
perspective.
second grade, I was going to a Jewish day school. So, like, the whole morning was learning Hebrew subjects, and we read through the book of Genesis from beginning to end. And years later, I read it again myself, and I'm like, I never read that story. What happened? And I realized in second grade, they skipped that chapter
Hmm.
for obvious reasons. Well, I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
They didn't think we were mature enough to understand it.
It's
So,
a hard one. It's a hard one to
so
understand.
tell me how that feeds into, well, maybe I don't know that it's a hard chapter. It's maybe it's hard for a second grader, but and maybe it's hard for an adult, but for different reasons, right? They thought we
Hmm.
didn't know about what a prostitute was, and how do you explain that to a second grader, right? So
Right.
tell me how that's about honor versus dishonor.
So from a strictly Christian Western worldview, we look at
hmm
things culturally, especially the baby boomer generation and the
hmm
Generation X, from a right versus wrong perspective. It's wrong. She was prostituting herself to her father-in-law to have a baby. And after two of his sons died, right? And so, but when you step out of our Western world and come into a Near Eastern worldview, you realize it's about honor. She was being dishonored by her father-in-law. She wanted to raise a son up in the name of her dead husband. And that system of honor was so important to her that she was going to accomplish that goal even by questionable means. And that's why Judah, he was going to have her stoned to death for being a prostitute, but he was the one who impregnated her.
So I think there's a little
And
bit more, there's some more complexities in that story, and it has to do with what they call in English the levirate marriage. I think that comes from Latin, that term, like Levir is a Latin term. In Hebrew, we
right,
call it boom. But let's not get too deep into that story. What I think
right.
is most beautiful about that story is she then sends him the proof that he was the one who had relations with her, and he says, Hitzad kami meni, which you could translate as she was more righteous than me,
Mm,
right? Which is, I think, a profound statement. He's not saying she's completely in the right, but
right.
she's more righteous than I am, which is definitely the case here.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
he was leaving her to languish. I don't want to get too much into the story. I've talked about it before, but because let's move on. But no, that's a great. I like how you're looking at that. That's really interesting, because there is something that I took anthropology when I was in college, and there's this concept of an honor culture, and if you can't understand an honor culture, there's a lot of things you can't understand in the world today. There's these things called honor killings,
Hmm.
and it's something that somebody who was raised in America in a Western culture, let's say, because you could be raised in America and not in a Western culture,
True.
in a Judeo-Christian culture, let me be more accurate, has trouble understanding what an honor culture is. And I guess that's not entirely true. Like if you grew up in rural Sicily, you came from an honor. In certain parts of America, you come from honor culture as well, actually.
Right.
But I mean, the example I've heard is like, the let's say in prison, and thank thank God I've only been to prison as doing ministry. But from what I understand, if let's say somebody trips you in the the lunch line or whatever, you the response is to go and beat that person near the end of their life. Because if you don't, you've now made yourself a target. And
Mm.
that is entirely about honor culture,
Hmm.
right? And a very extreme honor culture, obviously, in that context, right? But that's how people end up like, murdering their sister or their daughter. And you're like, wait, you killed your daughter to save the family honor? That doesn't even make sense to me. I
Right.
don't, does that make sense to you? That's like a Middle Eastern honor culture thing. I'm not sure that was going on in Torah times, but there's overlap there, right? Meaning like
Sure.
it's more of an honor culture in some ways than like where it talks about the Redeemer of blood, which
Hmm.
is if somebody accidentally murders your close relative, then you have a familial duty to go kill that person, and so they can go to the city of refuge and then they're protected. Well, why would I kill some guy because he was swinging an axe and it killed my child, let's say, right? Like that's a
Hmm.
horrible, tragic thing, but why would I? So that was an honor culture thing, right? It
Right.
wasn't that you
Right.
were required to by the Torah, but the Torah said, okay, we'll let you do that because
Hmm.
that's part of the culture, right? But we're
Right.
not going to let you do it if they go to the city of refuge and the person's protected, right? So yeah, so there's definitely something to be said about the honor culture. There's an aspect there, and then you look at stuff that happens in let's say in the Middle East and in well, not just the Middle East. It happens in Pakistan leads the world along with the Palestinian Authority in honor killings, right? And you're like, why would you
Mm.
kill your sister? It doesn't like that's the crazy. I have four sisters. I can't even imagine, right?
Right.
It's the strict. Like that dishonors your family, but to them it protects the family honor. So
Right. Right.
okay,
Well,
yeah.
I
So
think.
there's definitely a cultural divide. Some of it is
Hmm.
maybe a good thing, um,
Sure.
but I think it helps to understand the culture of the Tanakh. I've always said, I've say history, language, and context. So,
Hmm.
so talk to me about how the Christians. And let me ask this question. This is an important question. There's some people in my audience who are hearing this and saying, "Oh, digital pastor Jim, he calls himself a Christian. I'm done. I'm out." They'll say, I'm not a Christian." They say we're Torah keepers, we're believers, we're Hebrew roots, we're Messianic Jews, even though we're not Jewish. What would be your response? Because I love how you're so level-headed. How you're not like punching people. You're like, here's my calm response. What's your level-headed response to that, Jim?
So I think one of the things, whatever side is attacking me, whether it's the evangelical Christian side who's saying, "Oh, you can't put people under the law," the law doesn't bind me up; it sets me free. Knowing the rules of the process helps me understand how to live a better life. It's not a bad thing. The Ten Commandments are beautiful. The 10 words, and then Paul talks about following the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law. And so, the letter of the law, I'll never be a Levite. I'll never do sacrifices in the temple. As far as I know, I have no Jewish heritage. My great grandmother was from Palermo, Sicily, and she insisted I be circumcised on the eighth day. So she was probably a
But she
converso from
probably
the
grew up
late.
in an honor culture, my guess would be, where they had,
Yeah,
I mean, that's the whole idea of vendettas. Well, all right, go on.
yeah, exactly. The Sicilianos, buongiorno, and So, but the idea I think is I think that what Yeshua taught is that he said, they will know you're my disciples. How? Because you say God's holy name correctly? No, he could have said that. Because you follow the Ten Commandments correctly, or the Torah, or the oral written Torah? No, he could have said that. He said they'll know you're my disciples by your love one for another. Not
Mm.
because you agree on everything, not because you got everything perfect and right, but because you have love one for another. And he said, if you love me, you will follow my commandments. And some people define that as just the two commandments, love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God. But I see that as a summary of the original commandments that Moses was
Don't a
given
lot of
on.
Christians say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that that only applies to the commandments that are reiterated in the New Testament, along with ones that are added in the New Testament? Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's what Reformed theology will say.
Okay.
And so, but I disagree. I think Reformed theology is neat and tidy. It's very Western. All their theology is it fits in nice little boxes on the shelf, and the boxes don't touch each other. But the Hebraic worldview, everything overlaps and intertwines. It's
Mm.
spirituality, physicality, everything's it's very Eastern worldview. It's all connected and interconnected. Where in the Greco-Roman Western worldview, we would like everything divided up and in neat, tidy little
Like in the
boxes.
Tanakh, you don't have a soul, you are a soul. That's an
Yeah,
example.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, I love that Hebraic perspective, and it's an interconnectedness, not only just within yourself, but within your congregation, with your
Mhm.
family, with your community at large, with the world around you. What is considered the least of the commandments? Generally speaking, you know way better than I do, but that's when you come across a mother bird in her with her nest, and if you have to eat one of them because you're hungry on the road, you have to leave the mother alive and eat the eggs. And that's I don't know if that's maybe the correct understanding, but that's the least of the commandments to my understanding. Why would the Father care so much about such a thing? Because he's trying to communicate a message to us. Show respect. What is the first commandment with a promise? Honor your father and mother. And to me, that command to leave, let the mother bird go. Don't kill the mother bird with the eggs so she can reproduce again. You're honoring its mother
Mhm.
so she can go and reproduce. And it
So
almost brings tears to my eyes.
let's look at that verse because that's actually I was just discussing this with my wife. We call that shiluach haken, sending away the the uh, uh, the what do you call that? The nest.
Right.
Um, and so it's in Deuteronomy. Could you read that? Deuteronomy 22 verses
Yeah.
6 and 7. And
Deuteronomy
the reason you
22.
bring that up, I don't know if you this is deliberate. I think it probably is. So there's two commandments in Deuteronomy. It says if you do them, you'll have a long life. One of them is honor
Mm-hmm.
your father and mother. It's in the Ten Commandments. And the other is shiluach haken in Deuteronomy 22. In the Hebrew, it's 6 and 7. I don't know about in the English.
Yeah. And I want to comment. Your wife's name's Linnea. Is that how you pronounce her
Linnell.
name? Linnell. She is
Yeah.
wonderful. I love
Oh,
her
thank you.
devotions on Facebook. I forward them to everybody.
Okay.
She's such a sweet. And
Thank you very
one
much.
of my
They're also
favorite
on
videos.
TikTok, everybody, and on YouTube. And we're trying to get them on the coming.
Yes. Yeah, I forward your stuff every chance I get. And I love the videos of you and her driving through Israel. And she says, Nehemia, what had happened over there? And she's just beaming, she's glowing. And then
Yeah.
you're talking about what happened historically over there and over there.
So
And
this literally
anyway, I just
happened where we're driving to some place, some romantic getaway. And she's like, Nechemia, what happened over there? I'm like, oh, that's where Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal. She's like, why aren't we going there? Forget the romantic getaway. And that we end up literally spending the day at a place called the Muhrakan, which is the burnt ground on the top of Mount Carmel, where
mm,
Elijah defeated the prophets, like literally Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal, and it's overlooking one of Israel's main air bases, Ramat David. It's a really dramatic place.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it literally looks down on Megiddo, right? Armageddon. Like what a
Right,
dramatic
right.
place there.
Armageddon.
It's an incredible place. And and I'm like, let's go to the romantic spot because I've been there 30 times. And she's like, no,
Right,
this is where I want to go. And yeah, it's an incredible Israel's an amazing place. I've heard Christians describe it as the fifth gospel, right? Because like
right.
when you're in Israel, it's just like this flood of information. which I kind of am used to because I lived there for over 20 years. But
Right,
um,
right. It's
all right, Deuteronomy 22, 6 through 7. Let's have a look at that.
okay. If, as you are walking along, you happen to see a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground with chicks or eggs, and the mother bird is sitting on the chicks or the eggs, you are not to take the mother with the chicks. You must let the mother go. But you may take the chicks for yourself, so that things will go well with you, and you will prolong your life.
Hmm.
I love that. It's almost
So
a
I've never
double
heard that
meaning.
described as the least of the commandments, but I
Oh,
like the
really?
idea. And maybe there's some literature on that somewhere I'm not familiar with, but definitely if you compare it to honor your mother and father, it seems pretty trivial, right? Like who
Hmm.
cares about a bird? And you're and it yeah. So why does he like what an obscure thing and look, I've been hit by this by people in I would call them like maybe the fringe of the Hebrew roots movement who will come at me and say, Nehemiah, do you really think God cares about mixing different fabrics? Do you think really God cares about? And so what they've done is they go through the Hebrew roots process. I'll call it Hebrew roots, right? They
Hmm.
may not call it that.
Yeah.
They've come to trying to understand the Hebrew roots of Christianity, and then they come out the other end spiritualizing everything. All of that has an
Hmm.
allegorical meaning, and of course they can tell you what it is, and therefore and I'm not disputing that, but now
Sure.
it's in their eyes it's lost not only lost but never really had the literal meaning. And then they'll say, God, does God really care what you eat? He doesn't care if you eat pig. That's all a metaphor. And this is Hebrew roots people who will, like I said, maybe like at the extreme,
Hmm.
who they came out of Christianity through Hebrew roots, came out the other end. Everything was not just spiritualized, but it was always meant spiritually. And my response is, he seemed to kind of care with Adam and Eve, right? Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna take him at his word, but so so let's say this has a spiritual application we can come up with, but it also is meant literally. And
Right.
God actually apparently does care that you shoo away the bird before you take its eggs. And it's talking here about wild animals, of course, right? I don't think it's talking about
Right.
domesticated chickens. Um, but meaning the alternative is I kill the mother and take the eggs. And it's saying don't do that. Send away the mother. And this is usually interpreted by Jews as like mercy on the animal.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. In any event, so, do you know the story, the famous rabbinical story about this?
No, go ahead and tell me.
So there was a rabbi who's referred to as the other one, and
Hmm.
not in a nice way, right? It's like that guy, right? He's called
Right,
Achet,
right. He's that guy. Right,
and
right.
his real name was Elisha ben Abuya, and the story is that he was walking on the road, and he saw a father and a son who were walking in the opposite direction, and he overheard the father pointed to a tree. Stop me if you know this story.
No,
And
no.
he said to the and he said to his son, "Go climb up the tree and shoo away that bird and take the eggs." And the boy climbs up the tree, shoos away the bird and takes the eggs. And as he's climbing down, he falls and breaks his neck and dies.
Mm.
And Elisha ben Abuya, who is one of the greatest rabbis, he sees this and he said it's all a lie.
Mm.
God promised long life if you obey your parents, if you honor your parents, and if you shoo away the bird and when you take the eggs. And I see right in front of me the boy died. It's all a lie. And he became what we would call today a deist. A deist is
Mm.
somebody who says, yeah, there's a God in the universe. Obviously, everything came from somewhere, but he has nothing to do with us. He has no direct interaction with individual humans. So he became a heretic. And you call it an apostate, but really he just stopped believing in a
Right.
God who interacts in the world. And I don't know if the story is a true story. A lot of rabbinical stories are parables to teach you a lesson. Here's what's
Hmm.
important about the lesson. What did Elisha ben Abuya get wrong? What he got wrong was assuming that when God promises long life, it means in this world. Because maybe it
Mm.
means in the world to come. It could be
Hmm.
in this
Olam
world
Haba.
or in
Right.
Olam Haba, the world to come. And it's not like
Hmm.
Elisha ben Abuya didn't know what the world to come was. He obviously did. It was a rabbinical concept
Hmm.
around for centuries, for sure, by the time um, and I believe it's in the Tanakh as well, in Daniel 12:2 and Isaiah 66 and
Hmm.
many other passages. So, but he was assuming it's only in this world. And so when he saw the boy die, he said, "Okay, God lied, and therefore this isn't from God." Because he had imposed a paradigm on the Bible, and that paradigm didn't fit reality, so the Bible's wrong, not my paradigm. Right? What a
Hmm.
profound story. To me,
Hmm.
that's such a profound story, whether it happened or not. It probably didn't happen, right? But it's a
Right.
great story. He did become a heretic. That's probably true, because otherwise, why do they keep talking about him? Right? But the
Right. Right.
specific thing he saw, I don't know if that happened, but it's a beautiful, profound story. And there's an example where I'll look to the rabbis and say, I don't have to agree with them or be bound by their authority, but they have profound wisdom I can learn from. And it's
Hmm.
and it's a lesson not to make the mistake of Elisha ben Abuya, right?
Right. Right.
Or the greater mistake of forcing my paradigm on the Bible, and then when it doesn't fit, the Bible's wrong, right? That's dangerous.
Right. That
So,
is, it is, and that's thin ice. When I first started, I heard the Shema, and then I met the local Chabad rabbi. I won't mention his name just for privacy's sake. He's a
mhm.
wonderful man, but I don't know if he wants everybody to know what his name is. But and so when I went to him and I first started talking to him, he was like, Rabbi, I said, I'm not here to teach you what I know. I want to know what you know. I want to see how you look at the Torah. You've been studying this your whole life, and your people have been studying this for 3,500 years. A lot longer than me and my people. I come from a broken family. What is this saying, Isaiah? I'm a man of unclean lips, and I come from a people of unclean lips.
Well, that was
To
Isaiah talking about the Jews, and I would say that's true about us as well, and maybe we can both learn from each other. But what I love about
Yeah.
what your interaction with this rabbi, from what you're telling me, is that I see videos of this online where it's everything going wrong. You'll have this. I saw a video recently. This woman's in Israel, and she gets in the street in Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, and she's preaching with her microphone. You Jews need to accept Yeshua, and that's a recipe for
Disaster.
hurt feelings, because the
Yeah.
feeling there is, okay, you're trying to impose something on us, and it's specifically something on us that my ancestors died not to accept, and you're telling me I need to accept it. You know what? Between you and me, maybe it's right. Let's leave that open as a possibility. But if the way, I don't think it is, or I would believe that. But do I
Yeah.
believe it's a possibility? 100%. But if you go to somebody and you say you have to accept this, or you are going to suffer forever in an eternal conscious torment in hell, and all I could think of is my ancestor who suffered from a physical torment here on earth, or my ancestor's cousin, maybe, right? Um,
Right.
because this is what we're raised on in Jewish history, um,
Hmm.
for better or for worse, and look, it's not just Jewish history. Go look at October 7th, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, let's not go into that, but we're
Yeah.
hearing from
Yeah.
some of the survivors things that happened, and it really sounds like stories I've heard about from the First Crusade in the 11th century, when the Crusaders in Germany said, "Why should we go all the way to the Holy Land? We have infidels here among us, the Jews. Let's start with them." And and the stories I heard on October 7th, some of them were actually worse than the
Yeah.
things I
Yeah.
heard in history. And so imagine if somebody came to me and said, well, you have to, Allah is the greatest and you have to accept him. You have to proclaim Allahu Akbar. And all I can think of, whether right or wrong, all I can think of when I hear that is the people who shouted that on October 7th. And I'm not
Hmm.
trying to compare Christians to Muslims, but think
No,
of
no,
it
I
from the
understand.
Jewish perspective, how much suffering there was.
Hmm.
And you could
Yeah.
say, well, that was the Catholic Church. Okay, the
Right.
average Jew doesn't know the difference between the Catholic and the
No, we're all
Protestants.
Catholics to
And
them.
you know
Right.
what? There was persecutions by the Protestants since 1517, when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses. A lot went on since then as well. Some of it quite
Horrifying.
recently, relatively recently. So the
Hmm.
point is, if you want to have a dialogue, coming at somebody and saying, well, you have to accept this or you're going to suffer,
Hmm.
and all I can think of is the historical, collective suffering that happened because of the thing you're asking me to accept.
Right.
That's painful and it's not productive.
Hmm.
Um,
So yeah, that's why
yeah.
whenever I have a chance to talk to a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, Chabad rabbi, I talk about the Torah portion. I talk about the
I
Tanakh.
love how level-headed you are and how you're always so calm. That's what I love. I'm like, I gotta have this guy on the program because that's a calmness I aspire to. I used to be a hothead. I think I'm much more calm now and much more
Yeah.
level. But I used to be, well, I'm right, everybody else is wrong. I need to just, why don't they see that I'm right?
Right,
Okay,
right. Why can't
I
they?
gotta beat it
They have
into
a right to
them.
be wrong.
Yeah. So I
So
mean,
when I
I've been
just
wrong
and
enough
that's
times where I'm like, okay, let's leave open the possibility that I'm wrong and have more of a dialogue. So
Yeah, and that's what I love about the Jewish perspective on discussing things. You probably know how to say it in Hebrew. I just know the English translation. This is Torah and this is Torah. We're both discussing Torah. We
well,
may
so the
disagree.
expression is
Perfect.
something so there's something I actually disagree with. It's a
Okay.
rabbinical idea. The story is that there was a debate between the house of Shammai, meaning the disciples of Shammai, which was around the
Hmm.
time of Yeshua. Shammai and Hillel were about a generation before. The house of Shammai
Right.
and house of Hillel are exactly when Yeshua is being born and coming up in the world, around the year zero or one, right? There's no zero zero.
Right.
And the story is that there was a great debate for 3 years between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel, until one day a voice called out from heaven, a heavenly voice, what's called a bat kol, an angelic voice, and said, "Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim." Both these and those are the words of the living God. Right now, if you take that story literally, I profoundly disagree with it because two things can't be true. Let me rephrase that. Two things can be true, but God is not going to say one thing and its opposite and have them both true at the same time.
Hmm.
Um, so one of the excuses that later rabbis came up with was that, well, the opinion of the house of Hillel was true in this world, and in the world to come, it'll be the house of Shammai. Right? That was a
Mm.
later kind of, I would say, almost like Karaite reaction, right? Because my Karaite reaction is no, there's only one divine truth. We may not know what it is, but there's only one divine truth. That's where I am today.
Hmm.
So this solution that later rabbis come up with is no, there can be two divine truths, just not at the same time. Or they're not
Right.
applicable. They can both be true at the same time, but they're not both applicable at the same time. Right?
Right.
So that was the rabbinical reaction. But my position is I don't know what the truth is. I think I do, but I
Sure.
thought I did 30 years ago, and I'm pretty sure now I was wrong. So what else am I not wrong about? That's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you heard of that?
No, I
So,
haven't heard that
so the
phrase,
Dunning
no.
guys, look this up. This is one of the most profound things I ever heard. I heard it years ago. So Dunning and Kruger were these two psychologists, I guess. I don't really know. The
Hmm.
Dunning-Kruger effect is this idea that when people know a little bit, they think they know a lot. When they've
Mm.
learned just you learn the first truth, right? You learn that when
The
nowhere in the
elementary level.
I'll give you my Karaite reaction. The rabbis are wrong about a certain thing that I'm able to definitively prove. And I've read the Bible and I can see they're wrong. It says don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, and the rabbi said that means don't eat meat and milk together. Well, I can
Yeah.
see they're wrong about that. I've read the Torah. I don't see anywhere where it says that. So therefore, I'm right about everything else. Okay, so that's called being on Mount Stupid. That's right. So it's a graph. It goes up, and then I don't know if those listening. So it's a bell curve. So when you're at the top of like you start out, you don't know anything, and then you go up, and then you're on the top of Mount Stupid. Well, now I know everything, and everybody else is wrong. And then as you learn more and more and more and more, you realize, wow, there's a whole lot I don't know. And that's I forget what they call that, but that's like a mature wisdom in my view,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
When I was
Yeah.
17, I had read the Bible in Hebrew twice, from beginning to end, the Tanakh in Hebrew, from beginning to end, and I thought I know everything. There's I actually had this idea a little bit late, a few years later. I'm going to go to Hebrew University, but why would I study Bible? I know the Bible. I am sure I know it better than the professors. And then learned Hebrew linguistics, and I realized there were libraries full of things I didn't know, and I got to visit
Mm.
some of those libraries, right? So
Mm.
a lot of the people I see this in religion because it happened to me, is they're like,
Hmm.
oh, I was lied to that Christmas isn't in the New Testament. Now and I don't want to be insulting to anybody, right?
No, no,
But they
no.
think they know everything, and there's actually, let's be a little bit humble, right? I'll speak for myself. I need to be humble because I was wrong about a lot of things when I thought I knew everything. And I think that's
Hmm.
really important to be level-headed and calm.
Agreed.
And if
Agreed.
somebody attacks you and says, how could you say something so stupid? Don't you know that such and such was done away with? There's this guy on TikTok, I won't say his name, but this guy on TikTok, he knows everything. He's got a PhD, he's very knowledgeable. Everybody else is wrong, and everything else they say is stupid. Um, and you know what? He doesn't know as much as he thinks he knows. And again, I
Hmm.
won't say it doesn't matter who he is. There's a million of him, right?
Sure, there is.
And look, I've seen there's what really drives me, what bothers me, let's put it that way, is when I'll see
Hmm.
somebody who isn't coming from his agnostic, maybe atheist perspective, secular perspective. There's this one guy who comes from a Christian perspective. He's an evangelical Christian, and he saw the formula of the agnostic guy with the PhD, and he's like, "I'm going to do that as an evangelical, and I'll just be this obnoxious person who goes through people's videos and says why they're wrong." And
Right.
it comes off to me, and I'm not a Christian, right? But it comes off to me as, I know this is cliche. Where's the love in that?
Yeah.
And look at it.
Yeah,
Maybe that
exactly.
appeals to it.
Hmm.
It gets a lot of views. It resonates with the TikTok algorithm. But I watch that. I'm like, that feels so dirty and so hateful. That's how I
Agreed.
don't know. That's
Agreed.
how it
Agreed.
comes across to me.
Dr. Chuck Missler always used to say, he said, the more you know, the more you learn, the more you realize how little you actually know.
That's the
One,
Dunning-Kruger effect.
oh, is that what it's called?
That's
Okay.
called the Dunning-Kruger effect. That's the
All
fancy
right.
name for it.
Caleb, make a note.
Caleb, would you pop in and say hello? Can we get
Caleb
him
wants
in
you to come
here?
say hi. He's
I was just listening to your conversation.
Hey, Caleb, shalom. Are you over
Shalom,
there at
shalom.
the, tell us what the name is, Spring of,
Springs of Living
Yes.
Water.
Yes,
Yeah.
there
Springs
it
of Living
is.
Water.
I just ordained Caleb last Shabbat as my assistant
Okay.
pastor.
Oh, wow. All right,
Yeah.
guys, it's there in
Shmicha.
Colorado Springs. Sounds like a really fascinating situation. Um, I want to go back to, and I guess you kind of answered it, but I know there's people who are listening to this who are saying, because because Pastor Jim calls himself a pastor and uses the word church, even though he does everything else I do, right? And I'm not talking about me, right? There's people who are listening to this who will say, I agree with everything he's saying, but if you use the word church and Christian, we're done. Well, what would your response be to that? I call that, and I hope nobody's offended. I know I'm not going to say it because it'll offend. I'll say it anyway. So
Go
there's a
ahead.
certain amount of people who, let me speak about myself. I had what's called the ex-smoker syndrome. I don't know if
Hmm.
you've been around ex-smokers, but they
Yeah.
can't stand to be around smokers,
Right.
right? I've never smoked, so I could care less. I don't want to breathe it because I have asthma, right? But it doesn't. You want to go outside and smoke? Doesn't bother me. Like it doesn't bother me at all, right? You see this with vegetarians, right?
Mm.
Like you guys want to be a vegetarian, but there's vegetarians who are like the fact that people eat meat exists burns them even if they never hear about it or see about it. So I think there's a certain element of that. So what would you say to somebody who said, "Oh no, if you use the word Christian, I'm done." What would you say to somebody like that? Why do you use the word Christian? Let me rephrase the question.
So I do kind of I use the word Christian just because it's a simple way to define who we are and what we do.
Okay.
But what I really try to focus on is we are believers in the Most High. We
Okay.
follow the whole book, the Old Testament and the New Testament, integrate them back together.
Mhm.
I got saved in 1976 as my first real religious experience. And
Mhm.
in the 70s, we had this thing called the Jesus People movement. All these hippies were finding God and getting rid of drugs and illicit lifestyles, etc. And there's always these guys who come along with they get the biggest my Bible they could get. We used to call it a mule choker, an MC. This is the biggest one.
What?
And yeah, we call it a
What's
mule
that?
choker. It's such a big Bible. If a mule tried to eat it, it would choke.
And so what do you mean
So
it's big? It's like physically like large
yeah,
dimensions?
physically super large. Yeah, like just the
Okay.
biggest Bible they could find. Then they put a heavy leather cover on it, and then they go street witnessing, and they go tell people that they need to adhere to their religious beliefs. And they literally almost it was the imagery was they would beat people into accepting their
Okay.
message. Very bombastic and outrageous, and you're blah blah
Okay.
blah. And so we called them Bible thumpers because they thump their Bible and the preach in the streets, etc. And now in this new era of what I say is people, Christians returning to understanding what the Torah is really about and beginning to dig into the Torah, I call people who do that now, we call them Torah terrorists. They learn a little bit of the Torah and then they go terrorize everybody they know. Christmas is a pagan holiday. You can't celebrate it anymore. Oh, you can't eat pork. You're going to explode.
So my friend Keith Johnson calls that hitting people over the head with the Torah scroll.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Same idea. And so when I get the chance to when people come to our congregation, I had one young family. They showed up. I won't mention their name for privacy reasons, and they're just glassy eyed. I start with the Shema prayer at the beginning of our service. We do the Aaronic blessing at the end of the service. We read from the Torah portion. We try to get some of the cultural and historical background. And I don't feel like we don't need to culturally become Jewish, but we can appreciate the vast diversity of Jewish culture and integrate it back into our faith. It's not
Mhm.
alien to us, and it shouldn't be alien to us. So the Hebrew names, Moshe, on and on, the Devarim, the whole thing. So, and Caleb actually taught himself Hebrew growing up as a
Wow.
messianic believer. Yeah, so he
So
can
he was
read and
raised. We got
translate.
to have him on the program. That sounds really interesting.
Oh
What
yes, yes,
what
yes.
I find
Caleb.
interesting about what you're saying about, and I don't know, I'll have to talk to Caleb, but what I find interesting about that is that, look, I've been around all kinds of people since the 90s, right? I let's see, even no, definitely it was probably like 90 91 when I met my first person who I would call Hebrew roots. He didn't know that term because I don't even know that it was around.
Hmm.
Um, but in retrospect, I would call it that. Was it 90 or 91? I have to think more about it. I don't know.
Hmm.
But it was in Israel. And so I've been around folks coming from from a similar perspective to what you're describing, let's say, for quite a
Yeah,
long
yeah.
time. And most of the people for the first 20 or 30 years are like you. They were raised Lutheran or Catholic or, Baptist. What I find really interesting is people who were raised in what you're describing, because that's a different experience. That's
Hmm.
that, that's really interesting. I find that really interesting, because then it's really harder to explain the ex-smoker syndrome. They were never smokers, right?
Right.
They weren't raised with it. So, and so there's kind of I've encountered often a different perspective. Although the perspective evolves over time for everybody, I suppose.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
so, okay, so you're saying, like, look, everybody knows what Christian is. Why are we playing games? I kind of feel like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a
And
fair
but the other side of
characterization?
but we forget that there's a tapestry with lots of color. Like
Mhm.
for me as a Christian, one of the stories that was told about Jesus in the Gospels is he said, you struggle to strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel.
Hmm.
And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Camels aren't kosher. You're not gonna. I didn't understand. It had no point of reference. It's a Hebrewism, probably a euphemism that maybe makes sense to you because you speak Hebrew, you know the alphabet, and then for 40 years, it's like, Lord, I don't know what this means. It makes no sense to me. And then I learned the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and then the 10 words are letters. The
Uh-huh.
third of the three commandments is thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And so in my mind, I put those two thoughts together. And to me, I could be wrong, but to me, what Yeshua was referring to is you're taking God's name in vain and you're unclean from the inside out because you do that.
Hmm.
Because he said, you swallow the gimel, you swallow the camel. And so and camels are unclean. But the third commandment is don't take his name in vain. Did it change my theology? No, but I saw something, a nuance that Hebrew
Hmm.
kind of helped me understand what he might have been talking about.
Hmm.
Now I might be jumping the shark on that
That's
one.
an interesting. I've never
Uh,
heard that interpretation. I think. I mean, I'll tell you how I think most people interpret it, and I never thought differently. But maybe you're right. Is I mean, tell me if I'm wrong here. Isn't the standard interpretation you're focusing on unimportant things rather than important things,
yeah.
while missing the big things? So there's this concept called Freud came up with it. I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's profound when you hear this term. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Oh, it's called the narcissism of small differences. That's what
Hmm.
Freud came up with this term. But he said something we all
Interesting.
know, right? Which is Gulliver's Travels had this plot point where there were two different. kingdoms. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. I read this. Two different kingdoms of little people, the Lilliputians,
Lilliput,
and
right?
calling them Lilliputian little people was like kind of insulting them, right? By the author, I forget his name. Um, and one of them broke the eggs like on the wide side, and the other broke the eggs on the thin side, and so they had a war between them, right? So that is what we all have experienced, I think, in religion, which is it's the narcissism of small differences. But what it really
Mm,
means is the closer we are to each other, the more the small things get emphasized.
right.
Which I think when I first heard that, I'm like, wow, that's so true. Because if an alien were to come from another planet and hear about the difference between different Christian denominations, and even maybe to some extent between. I mean, look, I learned this when I studied at university. We had a class about Buddhism, and they were talking about like the three big branches of Buddhism, and I'm like, these are all the same thing. What are you guys talking about? Like what? And what was it was profound because there's these two branches. I forget what they're called. I want to say it's the Mahayana and the something else. I don't know. This was over
Right,
30
right,
years
right.
ago. And it was explained to me by the professor, this is the equivalent of Christianity and Judaism. Like there's this branch that was founded in the 6th century BC, like literally or in the 6th century BC, and this other one that came about like 500-600 years later. And the other one looks at the first one like they're completely lost. And the first one looks at the other one like you guys just changed everything. And it's like, what? I'm
And they're
hearing
just a
about
hair's
this.
breadth apart.
And I can't even understand the difference of what you guys are talking about in the two different or three different Buddhist like thingies. And 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 I think an alien would hear about that in Christianity and Judaism and understand, wait, so you both believe in one God, but like you're talking about did the Messiah come or is he going to come again? And this is a central thing. You got to do this. You got to believe this. Like, or you have to, or certainly within, I mean, literally there's Jewish sects that what
Hmm.
separates them is, I'm not trying to be funny here, literally the
Yeah.
color of their socks. Like if you
Hmm.
look at Hasidic sects, there's one
Yeah.
Hasidic group that will wear white socks on Shabbat
White
and the other group
socks,
will wear black socks.
black. I see
And
them.
and and if somebody from the white sock group marries the black sock group, the woman is considered like she's gone off the deep end.
Right, right.
She's left the faith, right? We can no longer
I
talk to our grandchildren over this, right? That's the
right,
narcissism
right.
of small differences.
Yeah, I was at a Chabad meeting with a Chabad rabbi for Rosh Chodesh,
Uh-huh.
and I'd never seen anything like this. So I'm excited, Rosh Chodesh, and I'm looking around. I said, "There's no new moon." And of course, I read some of your material and studied
Uh-huh.
up on Karaites, and so I was like, "Rabbi," because I learned you don't tell a rabbi anything. You ask them questions. They can't help it. They have to answer a question, even if they
He
know you're
might
leading them
answer with a
into a
question.
sometimes, but I'm
Yeah.
I'm the goy, so they got to tell me something direct. They can't they can't answer me with a question. So I said, Rabbi, is there any group of Jews who count the actual new moon in Eretz Yisrael? He goes, no, 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 no. All Jews do this. I was like, what about the Karaites? Oh, they're heretics.
Fair enough from his perspective. By the way, I want to come back to that word. You used the word goy, and I've
Yeah.
encountered people online who think the word actually not just online. I've met I won't say who, but somebody within my wife's family who said to me, "Oh, you probably think we're goyim," and he was talking about, or you probably think I'm goyim, and I'm like, well, first of all, goyim is a plural, goy is singular. Do you know what that word means? He says, yeah, it means debase animals.
Oh,
What? Israel is
no.
called a goy in the Tanakh. It means nation. So
Right.
goyim is literally just the equivalent of Gentile, and Gentile is from a Greek word that means the nations, right? So in
Right.
other words, it's Israel and the nations, and there's no negative connotation within
Right.
let's say traditional historic Jewish literature. I can't say there aren't Jews who are bigots who anybody who isn't Jewish they despise, right? That might be the case. But those people despise me too. I got news for you. Um, so, and there are derogatory terms in Jewish culture like shagets, which means abomination. That is a term that's everybody in America knows the feminine form of that, which is shiksa. Shiksa
Right.
is straight out 100% a derogatory term. It means abomination. If anybody ever calls you a shiksa, you should be deeply offended, if you're a man for
Right.
sure, but even as a woman, that they might not mean it offensively, right? Because they heard it on Seinfeld and they think it's a joke. It's not a joke. It's a disgusting term.
It's a very
Um,
vulgar term. Yeah.
but goy and goya, that just means not. I mean, that literally should be translated as non-Jew. So
Yeah.
that's not. I'm glad that you were able to use that in the correct non-offensive way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Look, there's people who use the word Jew as an insult. I had a friend
True.
from
True.
who grew up in the East Coast of the U.S. And one of his childhood friends said to him, he told me this story recently or 10 years ago, said to him, you know, you're such a Jew, and I don't mean it in the bad way. And he said, "What's the bad way?
What's the bad way?
What are you talking about?" But look, there are entire languages where they won't use the word Jew because Jew is an insult. Like in Russian, you
Mm,
can't call someone a Jew, whatever their equivalent is of Jew. You have to say
right.
Hebrew.
Mm,
I mean, Jew means
interesting.
we're from the Yehudah, from the kingdom of Judah. What's wrong with? In the book of Esther,
Right.
it says, "And many of the peoples of the lands, mityahadim, were becoming Jews." Right? Meaning
Right.
they're joining the exiles from the kingdom of Judah. So
Baruch
it's
Hashem.
in the Tanakh and the book of Esther itself.
Hmm.
Um, and it's certainly in the New Testament where maybe it means Judean, right? From the
Right.
province of
Right.
Judah. But then there's people in Galilee who are also called Judeans, so or Yehudim. So yeah, it's it's very strange, right? Like
It is odd.
it's we have these words that take on different meanings in different contexts, and if
Hmm.
somebody calls me a Jew, I'll never be offended by that.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
so yeah. So all right. So
Look,
let's talk about the other perspective briefly. So I
sure.
see you getting flack from people who are coming from the Hebrew roots movement who say, and they might not call themselves Hebrew roots, who say, but you gotta do what the rabbi, you gotta accept all the rabbinical traditions. And if you don't,
Right. Right.
look at and again, I don't want to name names, but there's this guy on
That's okay.
TikTok who has a video responding to Michael Rood, and Michael Root says something about the rabbis referring to them as Pharisees.
Hmm.
And this person says, "Well, that's anti-Semitic." He says that sounds kind of anti-Semitic. There's no rabbi that I've ever met who would be insulted by the term Pushim, Pharisees,
Right. Pushim. Yeah.
because Pharisee is a term that refers to rabbinical Jews before the temple was destroyed who observe certain um, had certain ritual observances that aren't commanded even in the oral law, but it was seen as like, here's somebody who's going above and beyond,
Mm,
right? So it would be like someone who's extra righteous, right? That's kind of what it meant, right? So not
right.
every rabbinical Jew was a Pharisee, even in the Second Temple times, right? You had what was called the multitudes, right? Am
Right.
Haaretz, right? So to be a Pharisee meant you really were following very strictly um, especially about what you ate. I won't go into details. We
Right.
could do a separate study on that
Right.
if you'd like. But it had to do with the ritual observance. Like you wouldn't eat at the table of me because I don't observe the things they do. So they wouldn't eat at the same table because my food would be ritually unclean just because I touched it, right? So that's what a Pharisee
Right.
meant, right? So
Right.
so
Right.
so I mean that wouldn't be something that would be like call somebody Hasidic today, right? Right? Rabbinical Jews don't say you have to be Hasidic, but if you are, they think you're. I mean, Hasidic means righteous ones, right? Or
Right. Right.
that's how they
Chesed.
use the term anyway. That's what it's come to me. But you have people today who will say, Jim, you got to follow the rabbinical Judaism, which is the
Hmm.
continuation of ancient Pharisees. What,
Right.
what, explain to me their perspective as you see it, and what's your response to it?
Sure, sure. And I'm friends with some of these guys, and most of them are actually Jewish by heritage. They
Okay.
may have been not raised in a Jewish home,
Mhm.
but then found they had Jewish heritage, and they receive what they believe is the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah,
Okay.
and so and I've had these discussions with them because they try to tell me that, well, it's incumbent upon us as believers to obey the oral written Torah, the Torah Shebe'al
And do
Peh.
they say it that way? The oral law, the Torah Shabbal Peh?
Yeah, they'll say the oral Torah,
Okay. Wow.
or they'll say the what was the other word for it? The
Well, there's mitzvot
Mishnah,
Rabbanan, the commandments of the rabbis, or what's the
right? The
term?
Mishnah,
The
right?
Mishnah.
And
Okay.
so and
Yeah.
I've got the Chumash and stuff like that, and so they yeah, so they'll say we have to obey that, and I was like, well, I have a friend of mine. He's He lives in Chabad community. He got outed as being a missionary, which was very bad.
Wait, let's
He's
back
never,
up. Hold on. Let's talk about this guy. He
yes,
lives at Chabad. Chabad is a Hasidic, let's call it
sect,
branch,
right?
sect, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And they're one of the few Hasidic sects that's very open, meaning it's very difficult, almost impossible to join, like, I don't know, Bubba or something like that, like, which is pretty big actually. You have to be
Yeah.
born into it or marry into it. Whereas Chabad, I was once invited to a Chabad Shabbat meal, and I'm like, look, I'm gonna drive there. He's like, yeah, everybody drives. If you went to most ultra Orthodox, let's say if you were invited to Shabbat and they heard you were going to drive there, you'd have to park 2 blocks away because if they saw you driving, you wouldn't be welcome because they say it's forbidden to
Right.
drive on Shabbat. So Chabad is extremely open. I give them a lot of respect for that.
Right.
Okay, so this friend of yours, well, let's call him Tom. I'll make up a name. So
Okay,
Tom,
Tom.
so Tom lives in a Chabad community, but he's a believer in Yeshua.
Correct.
And is he actually a missionary to convert Jews?
Um, yes and no.
And
He
now I'm
doesn't want to
intrigued.
convert. Yes, he doesn't want to convert them to what we think of as evangelical Christianity, but
Okay,
he wants, because many Chabadniks believe Menachem Schneerson was Moshiach.
right.
There's a sect of Chabad that
Some
believes
believe he
Schneerson was,
is, not just that he
yeah,
was. And for
yeah,
those who
that
don't
he
know,
is
he's
Moshiach.
he's a rabbi who died in 1994. There are some Chabad who say that he didn't actually die. You just think he's dead. He'll reveal himself hopefully soon. If we're righteous
Right,
enough, he'll reveal himself soon, right? Something like that.
right. Yeah, several different versions
There's,
and
there's different
editions of
versions.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then someone said they even buried him with silver spoons and he's digging his way to Jerusalem.
That way I never heard.
So
That one I never heard. That's interesting.
yeah, that's a weird
Look,
one.
in the mainstream Chabad say yes, he's dead, but he's going to come back as the Mashiach, right?
Right.
Okay.
And so he is one of those guys who would argue that we are, as Gentile Christian believers, we're to follow
Mhm.
the Mishnah and the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And so I've had discussions with him
So
about this.
Tom is of Jewish heritage, or he's not?
No, he's not.
Oh, he's
He was
not.
raised no, he was
Okay.
raised Baptist. And
Okay.
but he originally stared off in Bible college,
I
dated
hope
a
his
Jewish
name
girl.
isn't really Tom, by the way, because I don't
No,
know who he
it's
is,
not.
and we should respect his privacy. Okay. Go ahead. All right.
No, he's not. So, and then his wife, he did eventually get married. She's not Jewish by heritage. It
Mhm.
was easier for her to quote unquote convert, but of course the Chabad won't let him convert because if he has to deny his faith in Yeshua. And so, but he does
Tell me what
the
that
morning
means. Do
prayer.
they literally ask the question, "Do you believe in Jesus?" or what's the?
Yeah, so the one of their tenets, if in the process of conversion, is you have to deny Yeshua is Hamashiach specifically. They
Oh.
require you to do that. Now, I have a friend who converted 30, 40
Is
years
that
ago, Rabbi
specific to
Bickle.
Chabad? I don't. I haven't heard that before.
I assume it's
Well,
specific to Chabad because Chabad
mhm.
intentionally proselytizes Christians to convert to Judaism.
Really?
I've had,
I've not
oh
heard
yeah, I've
that.
had a Chabad rabbi ask me three
Really?
times, Jim, you should convert. You're practically a Jew already.
Wow. I have never heard that. Because the
Oh yeah,
standard Jewish idea is that you don't
no
proselytize to
proselytizing.
non-Jews, and in fact, you turn them away 3 times. So if they say,
Hmm.
"I want to convert," you without telling them it's a they don't
A
know they're
reward.
going through a process, but they are of being rejected 3 times. And the fourth time they say, "Okay, here's this long conversion. You take a class for a year, and then a bunch of other things, whatever."
Right,
Um,
right.
wow, so I haven't heard that. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Wow,
the
this is such
Chabad
a
is,
fascinating conversation, guys. Please listen to the whole program. I know you might have just heard a little clip on TikTok or something. Come listen to the whole thing. It's one of the most interesting conversations I've had in years. Go on.
so this gentleman, he wants to start a synagogue that's very rabbinic and orthodox, but accepts Yeshua as Hamashiach. He said, Jim, I'm Shomer Shabbat. I'll only walk on the Sabbath. He said, I eat only halachically, not just biblically clean, because there's a difference between eating
Yeah,
kosher
for
and
sure.
eating biblically clean. There's
Hmm.
obviously some separations depending on what halachic school of thought you're going to follow, but he does everything just exactly like a Chabad rabbi would do. He's
Wow.
very well educated in the Mishnah and in the
Wow.
Talmud, in the Gemara. He's super well educated in all these things. He quotes it off the top of his head. His wife, if you saw her, you would believe that she was a Chabad Hasidic woman. Her children have peyot. The boys do, but he couldn't convert. And so, but I asked him, I was like, why would you embrace this cultural group who, on the very fact that you proclaim Yeshua as Hamashiach, they would say you're a heretic and cast you out, but you would obey every other rule they follow? I don't understand that.
What was his
That
answer?
he just said because he feels he's supposed to bring Yeshua to these Chabadniks.
So
And
that's very interesting because that's different than what I've heard from
right,
people. I've met a lot of people the way you're describing, and I've heard a different, and that's why I asked, because the explanation I often heard, now I've heard that explanation as well, but usually not. That's what I've normally heard, let's say often heard in the past, was, well, Yeshua was a Pharisee rabbi, and the continuation of the ancient Pharisees after the temple was destroyed, or whatever, they don't necessarily know those nuances, right? But the later continuation of the Pharisees are the Orthodox rabbis, and um, and they sit in the seat of Moses. We have to obey them, right or wrong. We have
right,
to obey them. They're the ones that God Himself has put over Israel. When Yeshua comes back, this is what they say, then He might decide something different. But this is what we have to do for now. So that's
right.
really interesting. So this is like, I hope this is a correct analogy. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here. This is my thought
Yeah,
process, right?
that's fine.
Um, Jordan Peterson says the way you think it is by speaking out loud, and then you'll often say stupid things because in your mind, in your thoughts, you also often say stupid things. So I hope this
You're
isn't stupid.
experimenting.
But I wonder if this is like somebody who goes to like the Amazon rainforest and lives among some semi-contacted tribe and learns their language and walks around in a loincloth because if I don't speak their language and embrace their culture, how can I bring Jesus to them, or whatever it is, right?
Right,
Um,
right,
so that's very different. That's actually I don't think I've ever heard it that way. So
right.
that is different than what I've heard. I've definitely encountered people who have told me I'm only doing this to convert Jews. I want to befriend them, and then get. And then here's what I've heard. This is very disturbing to me. I'll be honest with you. So
Agreed.
I met one guy who was asked by a rabbi, "Do you believe in Jesus?" And he said no. When
Hmm.
he's telling me this story, he says, "Because I don't call him that. I call him Yeshua." And then he was found out, and the rabbi's takeaway from this is Christians are just liars. Because you
Right.
ask them if they believe something, and they say they don't when they really do. And to this
Right.
rabbi who eventually discovered this particular person, this was in Israel at the diaspora yeshiva. And if the
Mm,
person hearing this is listening, I hope he's repented. Because he
hmm.
gave believers in Yeshua a very bad name to the head of a
Right.
yeshiva in Israel.
Not a smart move.
Because this rabbi hears this, to him it's six of one, one half dozen of the other, and you just lied in order to deceive people to believe in Yeshua, right? That was the
Right.
takeaway from this rabbi.
Right.
So I think that's what we call a chil Hashem, a desecration of the name. In this
Mm.
case, I guess it's the name of Yeshua.
Well,
Um, yeah, go ahead.
when I was in Israel last April, I got
Hmm.
to go visit Netevia, which is it's truly a messianic synagogue. They're all Jewish people. The
Oh,
rabbi's
is
name
this
is
no, I don't know where this is.
Yosef Yosef Shulam,
Where is this?
and Yosef Shulam. He's just outside of the old city. I was staying in the old city, and I could walk to the synagogue.
Okay.
Um, and the current head rabbi is Yehuda Bachanan, and
Okay.
it's Netevia. And so Joseph Schulman, he said he started this synagogue in Jerusalem 50 years ago. There was three
Mhm.
of them when they first started, but they do full Jewish liturgy. They do the Torah scrolls, the Torah reading, and so he wanted to expand his building. He was telling the story,
Mhm.
and but in Jerusalem, you probably know that you have to get permission of the other synagogues before you can expand your facility.
I didn't
And
actually know that, but
yeah, okay. So this Orthodox rabbi of a neighboring synagogue refused to give him permission to expand his facility because he felt that they were fake. They weren't real.
mm,
They were Christians pretending to be Jews or something to that effect. And so finally, the rule, which is also in the Torah, in Jerusalem code, is you have to meet with your adversary before you go to court. And so Joseph kept inviting this other rabbi to come. And finally, the rabbi walks in the room and he looks around. This Orthodox rabbi is in the Tevya, which is beautiful. I've been there. It's a beautiful synagogue. And he
Mhm.
walks in. He goes, "You don't have a cross hanging from the wall." And Joseph says, "Why would we? We're Jews." And he goes, "You have a Torah scroll in the ark." He goes, "Of course we do. We're Jews."
Mhm.
And so finally they went through this whole process and they sat down and talked, and Yosef told him his story and how he teaches from the Torah portion, and things that he's done to help Portuguese Jews who were conversos to come back to their roots and make aliyah back to Israel,
Mhm.
etc. And so this rabbi says, "You're Jewish." He goes, "Of course we are. We just believe who the Messiah is. It's different. We
Mhm.
believe his second coming is what we're waiting for, not his first."
Okay.
And I love visiting the synagogue, and it was so beautiful. They'll have a translator for those of us who don't speak Hebrew, but so it was beautiful to visit. And they do active outreach in the community, but it's not a trick, And when I get the chance to talk to, I have a customer. I do carpet cleaning. I had a customer, she was in her 80s. I'm cleaning her carpet. She had Jewish paraphernalia all over her house. And I started talking to her about the Torah portion. She goes, "Oh, you're Jewish?" I was like, "No, no, 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 I'm not Jewish." She goes, "You're a Christian?" I said, "Yes." "Why do you know so much about the Torah portion?" And I said, "Because I love studying. I believe Yeshua is the king of the Jews. He was a Jew, so I need to learn about Judaism to understand him better." And I said, "Rabbi so and so and Rabbi so and so." "Oh yes, I know them. I know them." And so she goes, "Oh, my Christian friends tell me I should convert to Christianity. I don't need any of that." And so I just told her, I was like, "Listen," I forgot her name at the top of my head now, but I
Mhm.
said, "Listen, if Yeshua really is the resurrected King of the Jews, he's just waiting for you to say, 'Show me your real,'
So
and
look, I
he
mean, I
will."
think there's a profound difference between somebody who wants Jews to convert and then misrepresent, maybe not misrepresenting yourself, like Tom, right? Do you think Tom is
Right.
misrepresenting himself? Or in a way he
Nope.
is, and maybe he's not, because I don't know. You tell me, I don't know the guy.
Yeah, so my friend who wants to start a synagogue, he wants it to be, you would walk in and you wouldn't know that it wasn't a Chabad service. Everything would be the same. Just like at Netevia in Israel. If you walked in to their service, they would do everything like you'd experience in a regular Orthodox synagogue.
Mhm.
They read the Torah portion, they do the same songs, the responsive readings, and everything's just like a synagogue. But then they get in once the Torah portion's done and the Haftarah, then they'll get into the Brit Hadashah portion that couples with the Torah portion.
Mhm.
And so it's not a compromise. It's in the same sense that there are Chabad rabbis who believe Schneerson is Moshiach. He says, "I believe in operating in the Hasidic way, but I believe Yeshua is Mashiach.
Mhm.
And I can show you from the Talmud why I believe this."
Mhm.
And I can't argue with him because I don't know the Talmud. But I just thought it was fascinating.
People have
I
been
find it
arguing
really
that for
fascinating.
700 years or 800 years. There
Yeah,
was
exactly. For
Rabbi
quite some
Yechiel
time.
of Paris had a famous disputation with a Catholic counterpart
Priest.
over,
Right.
and he was very surprised because the basis of the debate was about the Talmud,
Mm.
not about the Tanakh, which was kind of different than earlier debates, if I remember my
Is that
history
the
correctly.
disputation of Maimonides?
No, that's no. So there's a dispute. Maimonides never had a disputation. There's a
Oh, oh,
disputation of Nachmanides, who is
oh,
Rabbi
Nachmanides.
Moshe, son of Nachman, not to be confused with Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe, son
Right,
of Maimon. Um, Nachmanides was in 1263 in Barcelona. That's called the Disputation of Barcelona.
okay,
Shortly before that, I don't remember the exact year, there was a disputation in Paris. It's called the Disputation of Paris with Rabbi
right,
Yechiel of Paris. Um, and they chose actually the top rabbis, like these were heavy hitters, right?
right.
That like the Pablo Cristiani didn't know what he was getting involved in when he chose Nachmanides, or maybe the Jews chose him. I'm not actually sure. I forget. But this was like one of the top rabbis of all time who had an encyclopedic knowledge. Um, and he was. But anyway, yeah. So this is a debate that's been going on. So Rabbi Yechiel of Paris was another one who was a few years before that, and that was a much more well, the King of France was a really bad guy, and I'm pretty sure he's a saint in the Catholic world now. but he
I
was
wouldn't
like
be
he
surprised.
was
Yeah.
an open anti-Semite, evil human being who the result of the disputation in Paris was that they burned the Talmud, which
Mhm.
like what a horrific thing. You might not agree with the book, but
Yeah.
why would you burn it? Um,
Right. Right.
yeah. So wow. So let's go back to Tom because I find this so interesting. So here's what I can understand, and I don't know if this is Tom or not. So,
Hmm.
so I forget which organization, but I read this years ago on their website. They've changed it since
Hmm.
probably find it in the archives of the Wayback Machine. It
Right.
was one of these messianic organizations who explained their purpose was to create an environment in which Jews can feel comfortable coming to Jesus or Yeshua.
Right.
Right. In other
Right.
words, they're saying, look, I mean, it really is like the guy going to the rainforest, right? Right?
Hmm.
Like what? I have to give up, whatever they do in the rainforest, right? I don't know. Look, the Catholic Church kind of does that in the sense that they'll take, I think, what is there's an Aztec goddess or something that was brought to the Vatican or a copy of the Aztec goddess.
Yeah. All the gods from all over the
And why do
world.
they
Yeah.
do that? They say because, the people in Peru, this is what they're comfortable with. Why do they have to give that up? We'll just call her Mary, right? How is it any different? Right? We'll just
Right.
proclaim her to be Mary, and then they'll be comfortable. So, and I understand there's a difference because Yeshua was a Jew, right? So there is a difference, right? But
Right.
still,
Right.
I
Right.
feel like there's an analogy there that there's people who are saying, why do you have to give up your Jewish culture to believe in Jesus? Let like why do you have to go to a Sunday church and have an Easter bunny, right? The irony is that most of the Jews who I know came to believe in Jesus, or many of the Jews, I should say, they're much more
Hmm.
comfortable in Sunday church than they are in the um, like I've spoken to a lot of Jews who have said to me, well, the reason I became a Christian is because I want to be close to God and I don't want to have to keep Shabbat, right? So
Hmm.
I'm much more comfortable in the Baptist church than I am in the Messianic synagogue, right? So I've encountered quite a number of people like that. Um,
Right. Right.
but for the ones who are comfortable maybe with that, and I've met those people too, they say, well, I don't want to give up my culture. So let's just have a synagogue where Jesus is accepted, right? Meaning that I kind of understand,
Right.
or I may be more sympathetic towards than what it sounds like maybe I'm interpreting Tom to be saying is I wouldn't be doing any of this except for to convert people. Is that is that fair? I don't know. Is
Well,
that
I think he would
or
still
is it a combination
practice.
of things? You say what?
Yeah, I think he loves the liturgy. He loves
Oh, okay.
the
And
the
that's
the
different.
the Talmud. Yeah, he passionately loves it. This isn't a
Okay.
passing fad for him. He's
So
been doing this
he's
for
not
years.
faking it just to convince people, like the guy I met at
No,
the Jasper Yeshiva. All right.
no, not at all. Now, here's another weird story. I
Yeah.
joined an organization called the UMJA,
What does that stand
United
for? I feel
United
like I've heard of them, but
Messianic,
don't know what it is. What is
yeah,
it?
United Messianic Jewish Association.
Okay.
So I contacted them because I know some rabbis, Messianic rabbis, who are from this organization. And so I spoke with the president, and I said, I want to join your association. Well, Jim, you're not Jewish. I was like, I know. But Jim, you're a Christian pastor. I know. But there's things that I need to learn from you guys that I can't learn any other way at this stage of my life.
Uh-huh.
And he's like, well, do you eat biblically kosher? It's like, well, I eat biblically clean, but yada yada yada. And
Did he
and
say
he's like,
biblically kosher or did he say kosher?
he said kosher. I said
Okay.
biblical. Yeah. So
You
I
added the
use
word
yeah.
biblical. All
I
right.
have the biblical, right, right. And
All right.
so he's like, Jim, he says, I got to tell you. He goes, I was raised Jewish. I did accept Yeshua as a young man, and I became a Messianic rabbi. And I'm friends with all of the Jewish community, the Orthodox community in the neighborhood. And, I don't fish in their pond, they don't fish in mine, kind of a thing. And but you're just not Jewish enough. And I was like, according to the Jeremiah and Ezekiel, what happened to one new stick in his hand, both Jew and Gentile together? I argue with him for an hour. And he goes, Jim, are you sure you're not Jewish? Only Jews argue with me this much. He says, I'll take it to the Beit Din, we'll discuss it, and we'll see. But I also knew the principle of the rule. You got to say no 3 times before you say yes. So finally
All
through
right.
the process, lots of conversations with the Beit Din, and these guys are all rabbinic.
Okay.
They follow the halakha and they discuss halakha, because there's lots of different schools of thought amongst halakha in many different
Mm-hmm.
ways. And so they allowed me to join as a Christian pastor.
Oh
I
wow.
started off as yeah, I started off as a mashpiach, Well, no, they allowed me to come in as a moreh, a teacher, and then now they said we watched your TikTok videos. He said, and the guy was telling me, he's like, Jim, you're saying the exact same things that I would say to these antinomians or to the other people who
Tell
are
us what
arguing with you that I
antinomian
would
is.
say.
I know, but I don't think much of the audience
Oh
may
yeah,
know.
antinomian, those who don't believe we're to follow the Torah. It's against the law
Mhm.
essentially, or
Okay.
replacing the law of Moses. And so he told me, he said, I've been watching your videos. You're saying the same things as a messianic rabbi that I would say to them, and I've been doing this for 50
Mhm.
years. He's actually my
Mhm.
age. So and he said, so we want you to become a part of our association.
Oh wow.
And so I went, yeah, so it's been really fun.
Are they going to be
And the
upset that you're on this program? It's already gone out live. It's a bit late.
Oh no, no, I think they would love it. I think they would love it
Okay,
because
wonderful.
I feel my personal mission, in which that's one of the things I love about your relationship with Keith Johnson, is it's like there's a bridge between the Jewish world and the Christian world, and Keith seems to you guys come across that bridge together, and you discuss Torah together, and you talk about the scriptures together, and I found that very very inspiring, and so I
Mhm.
feel like my mission is to do something similar when I was in Jerusalem, I walked down through the Jewish quarter, all these guys wearing their hats and stuff, looking for Rabbi Yishai Nachai, I think his name is, and
That.
to interview him. Just an amazing guy, Orthodox rabbi. His family came from Persia. His grandfather walked and carried this 800-year Torah scroll, and he has a shul there.
Hmm.
We had a wonderful conversation. Beautiful man.
Wow.
He doesn't believe in Yeshua. He's an Orthodox rabbi.
Mhm.
He was trying to figure out what I was doing there. And I was
Yeah.
just like, I love this. He goes, oh, you don't tell Jews about this Jesus stuff? I was like, why would I? We talk about the Torah. It's the
Mhm.
foundation of everything.
It's interesting. I met this guy about almost 10 years ago, and I wanted to have him on the program, but I never got around to it. Maybe he'll hear this and come on. I don't remember his
Yeah.
name, but he wrote a book, or he was involved in a book called Post-Missionary Messianic Judaism. And
Mm,
the name says it all. And he said to me like this, Nechemia, he said, Nechemia, look, this is how it started out. We were just trying to convert Jews to Christianity. But now we've had generations that have grown up in it, and it's a real thing now. It's its own
mm,
thing, and we don't want to just convert Jews. We want to be Jews. That's a profound statement. I mean, he really said something to the, it's been 10 years, so I might be misquoting. I hope I'm not misquoting him, but he said something to the effect of, we don't want to just convert Jews. We want to be Jews who
yeah.
believe in Jesus and or
Yeah.
Yeshua, whatever he said. I don't remember. So
Sure.
wow,
Sure.
what a profound concept. But here's the
Hmm.
problem. Most Jews who hear the word messianic, they think Jews for Jesus, which
Right.
is a
A
organization that
tragedy.
solely exists, as far as I know, to convert Jews to Christianity. So meaning like to mainstream Christian, like I think if I'm not wrong, I don't know, I could be wrong.
Hmm.
My understanding is if their goal is to get you into a Sunday church,
Right.
and to give up practicing forms of Judaism because that puts you under the law and separates you from Jesus, right? Or I don't know the exact
Right.
terminology, but that's what
No, I
I've
think you're
been
right.
told.
I think you're right. And
Um,
so, and that's why, yeah, Netevia in Jerusalem,
mhm,
if you're Jewish, they want you to stay Jewish. Some of them are Sephardic, some of them are Mizrahi. I met a guy, his family was Bukhari. He was a Bukhari Jew.
mhm.
And he told me, he's like, well, my family's Bukhari. I was like, oh, you're from Iran? And he goes, Christians never know what the Bukhari Jews are.
I thought most
Oh, Nehemiah
Bukharians were
Gordon. I
from
heard him talk about it.
Uzbekistan, but maybe some are from Iran as
Well,
well.
yeah, Uzbekistan. I get it mixed up, the actual country. But yeah, so it was fascinating. So but just to realize you can keep your cultural
Mhm,
background. I'm not trying to become Jewish. I'm not Jewish. I don't need to.
mhm,
But I love learning Hebrew. I love learning
mhm.
about the different groups. I love learning about the Nanachman. I would love to go dancing with the Nanachman in Israel. That would be
Tell
so much
people what that
fun.
is for those who don't know.
Yeah, they follow Rebbe Nachman, and he
Mhm.
believed that he was Hasidic, so they worship God with intense passion. But he believed you're supposed to experience worship with such exuberance, it's overflowing constantly. And so they stop at a stoplight with speakers on the car. They all jump out of the car and dance around in circles
It's
singing.
quite a sight, I'll tell you. Yeah. So, guys, look this up. He was Rabbi Nachman of Breslau, and he's buried in a place called Uman, which is today in the Ukraine, or Ukraine. And he so there's us. a faction of them, I don't think it's all of them, that believes if every Jew says the name of their rabbi, then their rabbi, who is the Messiah, will come back. And so they actually write out his name as the syllables. They write Nach, Nachma, Nachman. And so you see it in graffiti all over Israel. And you're like, what
Hmm.
does that say? And you sound it out, and by the time you're done, you've said the name of the rabbi. And which is so they're kind of almost trying kind of trick you to say the name, because if every Jew
Right.
says it, he'll come back. Not they don't all believe that. Some of them believe that. And so they're
Right.
called or the people who believe that, who promote that, are called nanachs, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I think at first it was derogatory, but now they've embraced it. Kind of like the name
Right.
Christian. Um,
Right. 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 Right.
interestingly. So they're like, yeah, we're Nanach. We want everybody to say the name of our Rebbe, and to embrace the values, which is like, so one of his statements was, you should always be happy, which I'm not sure I agree with that, but
Hmm.
um, that's one of their teachings, or his teachings. And then there's people
Hmm.
who, even during the current war that's going on in Ukraine,
Hmm.
they go to his on Rosh Hashanah, the rabbinical holiday of Rosh Hashanah.
Hmm.
They'll go to the grave of Rabbi Nachman of Breslau, and there's tens of thousands of Jews, many of them who aren't even religious, who are like, okay, I hear this is like where you have a spiritual, and they have spiritual experiences. They go there and
It's beautiful.
they have all
Yeah.
kinds of incredible experiences with, there's also some bad stuff that goes on, but overall, it's like, this is like a Jewish pilgrimage. And it's kind of a strange pilgrimage, because there's
Hmm.
Jews flying from Jerusalem to Ukraine, to Kiev, and then taking a bus or a train. Actually, in the last few years, they've been flying into like Poland and Belarus, and then or wherever. I'm not exactly sure how they get in. But like
Right.
last year, they like waited, some of them, for 12 hours at the border to get in, and eventually got in and spent, the holiday weekend there, or holiday days. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting. It's what we call, or what the Hasidim will call Lebedik, which is
Hmm.
of the heart. It's what I think Christians would
Lebedeck.
call spiritual. They're very spiritual people. So
Right.
it's
Right.
very, very
Right.
interesting.
Isn't
Yeah,
Lebedeck, isn't that German for love?
Lebedik
If
is
Lebe
from the Hebrew word lev, which is heart,
heart. Okay.
and Lebedik means of the heart. And yes,
Ah.
maybe it's a play on words with the German word Leb, but Lebedik is of the heart. Like
Hmm.
Chabad are famously Lebedik. Ask your Chabad rabbi if he's Lebedik, and he'll get a kick out of that. So
Yeah,
um,
he's
So
hilarious.
Hasidim tend to be very Lebedik. I'm from the Lithuanian tradition, which tends to be very intellectual rather than Lebedik.
Hmm.
Chabad
Right.
actually
Right.
combines the two. They're both Lebedik and intellectual,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
famously. So, yeah. So I mean, I guess what you're really saying is there's a lot of expressions within Judaism, and you can maybe learn a little bit from everything.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, pretty cool.
And dispel anti-Semitism and people who don't understand, because Jewish culture can be intimidating for people who weren't raised around it or don't know
It's
anything about it.
intimidating to Jews. What are you talking about? I've heard from so many Jews, they're like, I can't go to synagogue. I wouldn't know what page to turn to in the Siddur, in the prayer book. And literally, you'll go to synagogues of, let's say, more moderate Orthodox on the high holidays, and they'll
Hmm.
have what they don't normally have throughout the year, but they'll have like a big thing where they'll show you the page, and as they turn the page, and it has to be analog because they don't use digital devices on Shabbat or on the holiday.
Hmm.
So it'll be like
Right,
a big
right.
number one, and then a big number two, and a big number, four. We're on page 124, and someone will go up and put up the number five, so you see now we're on page 120, because it is intimidating, 100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I've been at the Chabad house for Erev Shabbat. I come early because Jim, come do the
uh,
prayers with us, Jim. And
uh,
so and he's Ukrainian and he lived in Hebrew in Israel for a long time. He's got a beautiful accent. I love the way he talks. And his
okay.
wife, they speak Russian, Ukrainian, Hebrew, English, a little Spanish. They're amazing people.
Wow.
Uh, anyway, so they got a beautiful family. So he's flipping through it. They're going as fast as they can, and I can sound out Hebrew words, but I have no idea what I'm saying. And just slow down.
Right. There's a movie called The Frisco Kid. If anybody hasn't seen it, you should go watch it. It's one of the it's a very profound movie.
Hmm.
But it's this rabbi from Lithuania who's traveling to San Francisco, and he for various reasons, he ends up having to travel through the Wild West back in 1849 or so, and he gets captured by Native Americans, and he's carrying a Torah scroll, and the chief holds up the Torah scroll to his followers, and he says, "I read this entire book." And he turns to the rabbi and he says, "Didn't understand a single word." I love that line. It's
Now, was that Gene
profound on.
Wilder?
It's Gene Wilder. Yeah, that's right. It's
Yeah, yeah.
profound on so many levels. Also, was a young Harrison Ford. So
Oh, really? Oh my
very
goodness.
good movie. Yeah, very. It's so many different. Like he there's one scene there where he meets the Amish and he thinks they're Jews because they're dressed like ultra Orthodox Jews, and back then pretty much all Jews from Eastern Europe were ultra Orthodox, um, and or certainly rabbis were. And then he sees the cross and he faints. But then he
Yeah.
sees they're really nice people who are honest, who are hardworking, and they get along. So it's a profound movie on so many levels. So, Gene, this has
I'll
been
have to watch that.
Jim. I call it Gene Wilder. Jim, this has been a digital pastor Jim. Guys, check him out on TikTok. Where else can they find you?
Yeah, so we're on Facebook. You can just look at it by my name. You can go to our church's website,
What's the name?
www
I
dot.
mean, Jim. Everybody's named Jim. What's the name they can
Yeah,
look up?
Jim. Last name is Pierce, Pierce, Pierce.
Mhm.
And then our church website is springsoflivingwater.co. And I also have a YouTube channel. That's the Wild Branch Ministries International.
Mhm.
And and so I kind of condense Torah portions and make them digestible
Hmm.
to non-Jewish people and some Jewish
Wow.
people. So it's a lot of fun. And I use sort of a Twilight Zone theme. It's hilarious. So like you just
Okay.
entered another dimension, a dimension of sight, of sound, of spirit. Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. You've just entered the Torah zone.
Wow. Very cool. Guys, check it
It's
out. We'll
hilarious.
post some links on nehemiaswall.com.
Yeah, thank you, Nehemia. I appreciate you
Thanks for
so much.
joining
And
me.
thank you for all that you've done this decade. I've known of you for almost 7 or 8 years. I know Chaim Goldman. You probably know who Chaim is. He's a
Oh, for
friend of mine
sure.
here in Colorado Springs. And but I visited a seminar you did in Denver 5 or 6 years ago, and I might have said hi to you briefly at the seminar. But just thank you for all that you've done to kind of explain the Torah to people who are just coming into a deeper understanding and the
Mm.
research, the translations. I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Miles Jones in a couple weeks.
Okay.
I know you've done some work
Tell
with
them I
Dr.
say hi.
Jones in the past. Yeah, yeah, and I met Byron Stinson a few weeks ago in Kansas. I don't know if you know
Mhm.
who Byron is, but I assume you met him or heard of him. He brought the red heifers to Israel,
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah. So anyway, it's just fun, interesting
I
stuff.
think I
But thank
spoke
you
to him
so
on the
much.
phone once, maybe. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, yeah, more than likely. But so he's a great guy. He's a
Okay.
Texas rancher.
Yep.
They need some red heifers. I'll get them some red heifers.
Okay.
I know
Nice.
it's weird. It's hilarious. So, but I just
All
want to
right.
thank you personally and your
Okay.
wife. What a
Awesome.
sweetheart.
Yeah.
What a sweetheart. She's such an angel, and you're a blessed man.
I love the spirit of like calmness and level-headedness that you have and openness. And so I hope I can learn from that and others do as well. Shalom.
Well, I've learned a lot from you already. So thank you for all that you do for the kingdom.
All right, I'm gonna hit stop here. I actually don't know if it's still going out to YouTube. I don't know how that works, so we probably have to end it or it will continue. But I'll send